Oh, it starts automatically. There's
Jody's here.
Yep.
All right, do you want us?
Hey, folks. Sorry, I'm a
Hey,
minute late.
Jody.
Ready? We're just getting started. We're just admitting attendees.
Great. Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
Just gonna close my door here.
Is my screen showing up well? The share screen?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
There's still people joining us, so I'm going to wait just a minute before starting tonight's webinar.
So Kathy, let me ask you a question before we do start. If we run a little long, is that okay? Or do we want to have a dead stop at 8?
Yeah, we kind of want to stop right
Okay.
at 8, I
All right,
think.
all right.
And I'll be handling the questions
Got
that come in. So welcome everybody to this month's edition of our series of Master of Arts in Financial Integrity program lectures. Tonight we have a very special presentation by 3 renowned speakers who John Moody will introduce. And they'll be talking about 9/11, a 20-year retrospective of the central backstory. I'm Kathy Mansfield. I'm on the faculty at Case Western Reserve University, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar tonight. Just a few housekeeping things, and John, thank you for forwarding that. First of all, just so you know, if you have questions, we're happy to take them, and you should please click on the Q&A button and put your questions in the Q&A, and then I will be posing questions to our panelists. You should make sure that you're muted, of course, when you're attending. And I will be putting up information about the CLE at the end of the program. And then Patty Harbold has put some of it up in the chat already. We wanted to make sure you know that this program for tonight has not yet been approved for CLE, and we're not sure if it will get approved for this year. So just so you know, we still have our application pending. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to John Moody from the Northern Ohio chapter of ACAMS, and he'll carry on from there. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Just want to remind everyone that ACAMS has its Hollywood event coming up here in March of next year. It should be another good event, hopefully more in person again. And they're looking to make sure that everyone knows that that's going to be available. They will also have a virtual attendance for that. So if you're not able to travel or looking to attend virtually, that's an option as well. Also want to give a shout out to the Northern Ohio chapter of ACAMS sponsors, which would be Key Bank, PNC Bank, the MGM Northfield Park, AML Rights Source, and then the Center for Intelligence Studies at Notre Dame College, as well as Case Western Reserve University Financial Integrity Institute and the MAFI program. So we appreciate all that support. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers of Dennis Lormel. He's founder and president of BML Associates. Phil DeLuca, former SVP, Director of Compliance and Controls at U.S. Bank, and then Jody Myers, Chief Risk Officer at Western Union. I don't want to go into a lot of detail because they have a really great discussion for you tonight about the central backstory of 9/11, the attacks, and then the funding and the investigations that were done and what was learned from those investigations and the new techniques that are applied. So with that, Dennis, I will turn it over to you to kind of lead and moderate the discussion this evening.
John, thank you very much. Kathy, thank you. And Patty, thank you. And to the members of the ACAMS chapter, it's good to be back here. I've made presentations with you before, and I've enjoyed them. And I love the association that you have with Case Western. And that's what my premise tonight is we're talking about 9/11, but we're talking about it from a different perspective. We're talking about it from a financial investigative perspective. And one of the reasons for that is this weekend's class at Case Western is going to focus on financial investigations. And I asked Phil and Jody to present with me tonight, and we want to do it in a discussional way about that backstory, about how important the financial investigation was, how important the financial investigations are in all of these cases. So when we look at the 9/11 situation, when we look at what happened, without adequate funding, 9/11 couldn't have taken place. And conversely, the financial investigation in response to 9/11 linked the attacks directly to Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden definitively within a few weeks. There was so much going on around that, but that was critically important. And part of that backstory is why I asked Phil and Jody to participate, because they were part of that in different ways. And so it's really important. And the bottom line is the importance of financial investigations, whether it's terrorism, whether it's other crimes that we'll talk about this weekend and things, it's really important. So to set the stage on that a little bit more, let me take a step back also. Kathy is going to monitor for questions. Please ask questions. We're going to entertain questions and we'll run with them as much as possible. But Phil, I met Phil, I think Phil, the first time we met was after 9/11, in the aftermath. Phil was at Citibank. And I'm sorry. Oh, Chase, I'm sorry. Yeah, but I got that right, huh? Good way to start. But the important thing is Phil was one of the pivotal people who came to us after 9/11 about what can we do to support what you guys are doing. And so Phil offers a very valuable perspective, and going forward, and most recently before Phil retired, he was with US Bank. And Phil has been a master at proactive investigative techniques. One of the things that we do in our space is we are inherently reactive. So the more we can be proactive, the better. And Phil is one of those people who have really understood that and taken that to a new level. And I'm going to give Phil a chance to talk about that. And then Jody and I met after 9/11. Jody was with the National Security Council, and he was an advisor there, and an important advisor. And he was behind the scenes involved in the partnerships and the coalitions and the moving forward. How do we make the financial piece such an important piece? So it's really something for me that's personally rewarding, in the sense that these guys are here because I know them for so long and so close to 9/11 in the sense of what happened. So I want to set the stage real quick. This year we had the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and we talk about 9/11 and the attacks and things. And I want to put it in the context of a couple of points, is that 10 years ago, at the 10th anniversary of 9/11, we had the death of Osama bin Laden. And that to me was an inflection point about the decline of Al Qaeda, and really brought that to full bear. And it talks about, when it talks about terrorism, the evolution and devolution of terrorist organizations. And that's what we're seeing and what we continue to see. But also in 2010 or 2011, we had attacks in Oslo, Norway, done by a single individual, a lone offender, who was able to get on an island where there was a youth and a young adult leadership retreat, and he was able to kill 70 or 80 people. And that should have been a forewarning to us about the threat of domestic violent extremism and domestic extremism, in the sense that he wrote a manifesto about his activity, and that became the Bible for other people behind him. 20 years in, we hit the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and in January we had the Capitol riots, and that was a gut punch for a lot of us. And it just brings back to where we were before 9/11, in the sense that before 9/11, we were in a state of complacency, and a similar complacency took place that helped enable what happened in January. But it also enhanced the fact that the biggest threat that we face today are either homegrown violent extremists or domestic violent extremists, and we're seeing a lot of that's going on. So I want to set the stage for that and go back to this pivotal point in time, 20 years after 9/11. And certainly what happened on 9/11 is something we'll never forget. But the point of our discussion tonight is the fact that the backstory for 9/11, the most important backstory about 9/11 is financing. Without financing, 9/11 doesn't happen. Without financing or following the money, we don't collect, and we don't get to the definitive point that Al-Qaeda was responsible the way we did. But to make that happen took an awful lot. And so I'm going to stop on that point. And Phil, I'm going to ask you first about your recollections, your involvement, what made you come forward the way you did to us. And then then we'll ask Jody, because he was in a pivotal place at the time. And then we're going to advance the discussion a bit more to talk about the partnerships and the importance of the financial investigation.
Sure. Thanks, Dennis. And thanks, everyone. In the first couple days, Dennis, as you will recall, it was absolute chaos. We had a ton of information coming in our direction, and being at JP Morgan Chase and having the global footprint that we had, or Chase has right now, I felt that we were a gold mine of information, or could have been a gold mine of information for the investigative process. At the time, Chase was, I believe, in 70 jurisdictions around the world. In addition to that, Chase was processing somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 trillion a day in wires. Each one of those, as you all know, has a ton of information on it. So I felt that that type of information would be useful to law enforcement. We just needed that in with law enforcement to be able to help, to be able to guide us in where we need to go. But in the beginning, it was chaos. After several weeks of the process, we started to build a cadence that I felt was very, very powerful for all involved. But in the beginning, like I said, it was kind of hectic, and we felt that with the information that we were sitting on at JP Morgan Chase, we could help. That's why we came forward. And then in the future, we took that information to a different level, which we'll talk about later.
Jody, I know that the first time you and I met was when we set up the review group, and you came over from the National Security Council. And I remember vividly the way you had that analytical look on your face, and you were assessing what was going on. But you had a unique position, having come before that from FinCEN and being involved with what we were doing, and especially in building the collective collaboration in the intergovernment agencies.
Yeah, I will never forget those days, Dennis. I think we're remembering the same moment, but what I'll just share, at the outset of this call, and first of all, thank you so much to you and Kathy and John and everybody for inviting me to participate. I was living in DC and working at Treasury, and I had actually recently been selected to move over to the National Security Council when 9/11 happened, and I was a week out from starting, and I was for a week I was just dying to get into the office, but it was so chaotic I couldn't even get a building pass, and we just had to follow the formalities. So I showed up to work a week after the world changed, and I had been coming in to work on a portfolio at the NSC, which had they had an office called Transnational Threats, and my role was going to be would include terrorist financing, but that would have been kind of a few clicks down the priority list. There were other things in my assigned portfolio. Of course, the world turned upside down, and then we suddenly found the whole government was focusing on terrorism. What I remember coming over to the FBI and meeting you and seeing, I don't know you must know what room it was. It was one of the biggest rooms I'd ever seen, certainly at the FBI. And it was full of investigators from all over the government, all the agencies. You had Customs, which later became ICE, and you had Secret Service, of course. But everybody, U.S. Postal Service, everybody who had an investigative arm had teams over there, and you guys had already started working in an interagency way that I don't think we'd ever seen before. And the same thing happened, with other agencies of government. And we quickly realized that we had to set up a formal structure to have, sensible decision making around how to manage through the situation.
Yeah, that and to set that a little more, if we could, and let me take a step back and go back to 9/11 itself. 9/11 took 3 years to plan and to execute, and again, without the money, that regardless of if you say $400,000 or $500,000 is a lot or it's not a lot of money, without that money, they couldn't execute what they did. Without our response and our abilities to build partnerships, things don't happen the way they did. And I think a couple of things that come into perspective is that I was focused certainly on the financial response, and people like Phil validated the fact that when the attacks happened, we were very fragmented at the FBI in terms of, it's a very chaotic response, but I felt that the financial focus was incredibly fragmented. And Phil, you attest to that because you talked about, the mixed signals that were sent. And what happened was the FBI immediately opened up and they told every field office to start an investigation. So there were 56 separate investigations, in a sense, that we were trying to bring in and centralize. And what I saw immediately was that different field offices that had the semblance of a financial investigation were subpoenaing the same records. And so I was able to get to the director and the deputy director and start that review group. And Jody talked about the working group area that we had, and bring those folks together, or bring that whole thing together, and then start to centralize that any request for information. But at the same time, we were reaching out for the financial institutions, and it was people like Phil that came forward. A couple of things I hope we can come away with tonight is the importance of the financial investigation, number one. Number two, to get to the importance of what we accomplished was the partnerships that were formed. And Phil was at the center of the public-private partnerships. Jody was at the center of the public-public partnerships. And when you can bring that whole mechanism together, what we do is inherently reactive. And so when we can bring things together, and what I respect about Phil so much is, Phil, your ability to be more proactive. And so as we progressed and we started to meet, what was your take on where we were going, how we were starting to proceed, and what we needed to do to better incorporate the financial intelligence you had?
So, good question, Dennis. So in the beginning, like I said, we received a lot of names, a lot of information. I think it was called back then the control list. Dennis. Most banks or all banks receive that same type of information. And our goal at that particular point in time was to try to discern or gather as much intel. First of all, if we had those people on that list as a client, to try to build a little bit of a dossier or history of what their account looked like, file a SAR and move on. So what I felt in the beginning of this, as we got that list of names, we carved off, I carved off about 7 or 8 people in my group that basically just focused on 9/11. Now, I had data people, I had investigations folks, I had a couple technology or one technology person, the main focus was on the data. So we filed as many SARs as we could in the very beginning to try to get the information over to the FBI or over to TFOS. And in filing those SARs, they weren't perfect SARs, believe me. It was getting them out the door as quickly as we could, and then taking those same SARs and studying the background of those customers, if you will, to see if there's anything in there that we missed, or anything in there that we can actually use for others that the FBI didn't know about. So that's how we started to initially build that proactive piece, by saying in the beginning, let's file those SARs, let's study those SARs, let's study the accounts behind them, and see whether or not we could. Our goal was to give you something that you didn't have.
And that was critically important, all that. And you think about it, when you put this in context with the number of financial institutions out there, and especially financial institutions like Chase that have that footprint where you're going to have those touch points, that makes this a lot more compelling. Jody, I won't say conversa, I was going to say conversa, but at the same tone, on a parallel plane, in the interagency community, we were trying to take that financial intelligence and do things. And you guys, you were responsible for starting the policy coordinating committee on terrorist financing, and then we had the secondary, the more private committee where we met at the White House on Wednesdays. And if you can expand on what we were doing there, and your role in that, and especially in leveraging the interagency partnerships and then the private sector partnerships.
Yeah, happy to elaborate a little bit on that. It was an incredible time, and I don't know. No, he's not paying me to give him a plug, but there's a whole book about this that Dennis features in personally. It's by a guy named Ron Suskind. He wrote a book about what was happening. I'd say, he captures a lot of the drama and a lot of the aspects of it. Let me say that, there were some incredible kind of starting facts. I mean, one of them was, I remember there was one gentleman over at the CIA who had devoted some years to studying bin Laden's financial network, and he had a lot of information, but it was intelligence. It wasn't necessarily actionable. Dennis had spearheaded the creation of this larger investigative group, and so things started happening at the same time. And I would say one of the main dynamics also that we experienced at the White House was, a seriousness of purpose, of course, across all elements of government, but there was also political kind of imperative. And I think the president felt like he needed to get out in front and be shown to be acting on things. And so one of the things that happened just practically was, we started issuing some sanctions through the Treasury Department based on some of the intelligence that the CIA had collected over time. And, and it gave the public a sense of, it was designed to give the public a sense of confidence that the government was reacting and moving. So one of the first public events we had was at FinCEN, which was kind of like through the looking glass thing for me, because I had worked there in the past. And the president went out there and met some intel analysts and had a public event. And so we started to see motion, right? And Treasury had sanctions power, and they wanted to use it. And I still tell the story this way, but it kind of quickly occurred to me that we had essentially a chessboard that we needed to manage. We were playing multiple chess games against multiple adversaries, and we had all the same pieces that we could move in any of those games if you analogize the chess pieces to the agencies of government or powers of government. So one piece might be the Treasury, and one might be the State Department, one might be the military, one might be the FBI. And the interesting thing about trying to manage through that was the way government works and the way most people think. They want to be effective. They want to be important. So most of those agencies tend to think of themselves as the queen on the chessboard, and everybody wanted to move against everybody they could get their hands on. And meanwhile, we had to create some kind of compartmented traffic flows so that the people had privileged information, could be kind of directing traffic, so that we weren't stumbling over one another as a government and doing something that didn't make sense on the chessboard. I mean, you don't want to move the knight if you're better off moving the pawn at that time. So it was, I can't say we managed all those games perfectly, but I think in general, we won a lot of games, and it was because of essentially a small group of people, including the FBI and the CIA and the NSC staff and Treasury, that were kind of trying to decide, mainly, at least with respect to tactical investigative results, right? I'm really focusing on that because it was very important. What about this person who appears to be involved in that scheme? What should we do about that person? And so that there was sort of kind of tactical decision making, but at a strategic level.
Yeah, I think, Jody, that's an important point, is that, and what we're talking about, because our focus was on finance, it was following the money in everything that we did. And that was collateral to going and following the bullets and the bombs that counterterrorism and the CIA were doing, and the infighting that they had. And one of the things that was very interesting, as far as I was concerned, it was the relationship we were able to establish from the financial perspective, is we all had a very good sense of purpose about what we were doing. And that's where, Phil, you come into this, is you understood that. And I was, Phil and I did a webinar right around the 9/11 anniversary. And one of the things, Phil, you talked about was that the different sense you had from us, that we were paying attention more than we had in the past, and looking toward you for more guidance than we had. And that was something that hit me at the time. So if you could expand on that, that would be good.
That's a good point. And yeah, that was a feeling that we had. So if you recall, Dennis, around, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks after the event. You had a number of, I guess there were 4 or 5 of us who came down to DC. There was Chase, there was B of A. I'm not sure if Citi was there, but there were a number of other large banks. And at that point in time, what we did is we really started to connect. And in connecting, we're talking about, the bankers, we're talking about what we think we have. And it resonated with law enforcement because we never had those types of conversations prior to this event. And, you know, again, saying that we sit on, or we were sitting on $12 trillion a day in wires. And the amount of information that you can pull off of a wire order is incredible. You know, and the fact that we were in 70 different countries at that time, I think what we started to do is we started to really, I don't want to say there was a wall, but we started to really break through and say, we think, guys, we can help. And here's how we think we can help. And that built from there, from that initial meeting that we had down in DC. And I stayed there for probably a week and a half or so with you guys. And then we had follow-up meetings. Dennis, you recall the frequency of those. I think it was every other week or every week or something like that. But there was constant communication, and we never had that level of attention and communication in the past. But we broke through at that point in time and made those inroads.
You know, I think Phil, and I know Kathy, you want to join, but if I may make a point, that goes to perspectives, and it's important to understand, especially for financial investigations, to understand the perspective of each of the constituents or the stakeholders. And in Phil's position, the banks, my position, law enforcement. And I always thought I understood the bank's position. And really 9/11 was one of the eye openers for me, was how much we relied on you guys. And the reaction that I saw that, well, wait a minute, it's like, this is the first time that we're listening to them. And that was a critical pivot point for us. And the financial intelligence that you had and your counterparts in the other banks was so important to us, and the ability to share that information the way we did. And this is leading back to what we're going to do this weekend. It goes to the power of financial investigations, because it was that intelligence, it was the interagency community coming together that enabled us to be able to put together as quickly as we did the information. But you know, we were looking on two tracks, because on the first track, it's 9/11. How do we solve 9/11? How do we definitively say who's responsible? But on the second track, what do we do to establish a template going forward to do this on a continuous and a regular basis? And that's where, Jody, you come in. But Kathy, I'm going to stop because you were trying to say something.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to let you know we have two questions. One is backward looking and one is forward looking. So actually that was a great segue, Dennis. One was the backward looking one was, as data unfolded and financial pictures began to form, were there similarities to prior Al-Qaeda attacks and their funding? For example, the funding related to the USS Cole attack a year earlier. And then the forward-looking question that we got is from one of our MAFI students. If the exact same attack and corresponding setup took place today, with all the changes that have been made within the country, the US Patriot Act, strengthening BSA, AML, CFT, what is the likelihood it would be caught before it could be executed today?
Jody, you want to, and I have a lot to say, but
Yeah, those are good questions. I like them. I like them. I would say, I'll take a crack. I'll try to answer both, but then I'm interested in Phil's and Dennis's views too. I would say, with respect to the kind of USS Cole, for example, and you know, what did the funding look like? You know, that's kind of my reference to this. What we knew from Intel. You know, I think we knew a lot about bin Laden's network, but you know, we didn't know what was happening, what was evolving. We didn't know what to do about some of the things that we knew. And we were learning more, right? As Phil and Dennis were discussing. And I think we just learned a lot about how to learn more and what to do with financial information. So, I probably the funding schemes were similar. I mean, they were probably coming ultimately from the same sources. I mean, there were civil lawsuits that have played out. There's public information out there about what bin Laden's financial network looked like. So, I mean, that's probably all I'll say about the backward-looking piece. On the forward-looking one, I think is super interesting, and we're going to open up Pandora's box here, because I think that the world has changed so much. I mean, on the one hand, kind of narrowly answer the question, I would say I'm not aware of another time where we had so much cooperation between, especially among the law enforcement agencies, which tend to be a little turf oriented, right? They've got their particular priorities, that it's their top-down structures, they're focused on their jurisdictional scope. And what happened in 9/11 was just a big merger of those agencies. And I think over time they started to pull apart again. And so we probably don't see that kind of cooperation like we used to. I'm not in government, I don't know. At the same time, the financial information that's coming into government is very powerful today. And I think government has better systems, probably better automated systems to analyze it, probably better professionals in general across the teams. At the same, that's on the positive side. On the negative side, though, there's some big marks on the negative side of the ledger. I would say one of them is that the funding for investigators, financial investigators in government, is just not there like it should be, given how powerful and effective we know it can be to have good financial investigators working on major problems, national security problems. So, IRS CI was long one of the best financial investigative agencies. They've been cut more or less in half in the past 10 years. And I know that Dennis's old stomping grounds, the TFOS unit, was closed down, and he probably knows more about that than I. So that's unfortunate. And then the super big change, I think, is that the targets have changed, and we're now looking mainly, the main threat, I think, is coming from domestic violent extremists, and it's a different problem set. It's first of all, it's a lot of people potentially that I would, if I were in the FBI, I'd be worried about being overwhelmed. Can I track all this? And then secondly, because it's also kind of a challenge to domestic surveillance, and it's tied up with First Amendment rights, and I think it presents unique challenges for financial institutions reporting on their domestic customers.
So let me pick up on that. And Phil, I want to come back to you in a minute about what Jody just said about the domestic threat, especially with your background. But I'd like to just jump on a couple of things, in both directions. One of the things I would say is that we had a sense of complacency before 9/11, and unfortunately, I think we've regressed to that sense of complacency today. So a lot of the advances we've made when it comes to terrorist finance and financial investigations, we've lost that because to Jody mentioned it, and this sticks with me very deeply, is that the FBI has dismantled the terrorist financing operations section. CIA has dismantled their financial operations section. And I don't think anybody has read or there, and I don't want to get on a soapbox, but here I go, the 9/11 Commission report, where it said that we need to have these FATF recommendations. And the folks who are going to be in the class this week, we're going to talk about financial investigations. FATF specifically in recommendations 3 and 30 talk about financial investigations being pivotal to whatever the crime is. And again, we're getting away from that. But going back to both of those questions and the points, I think we have better technology today. We have better capabilities, but I also think we've gotten complacent again, and that hurts us. And going back to the coal and to other incidents, we didn't have the ability back then because we didn't think about terrorist finance. The first time terrorist financing came into the picture was 9/11. And here's a point of irony. Before, on 9/11, I ran the financial crimes program in the FBI. And leading into about a week before 9/11, we had a consultant who was helping us. And I was trying to establish the program priorities. I had 3,000 agents that answered to my program. And I wanted to give every field office the latitude of deploying those agents as they could, but we had national priorities, and sometimes the national priorities and the local priorities and the field office priorities, they don't align. And I wanted to give the field offices that capability, and not to get too long-winded because we don't have much time, but the point is, this consultant was dealing with me, and as an aside, he said, you know, the counterterrorism is thinking about, should they be doing anything with terrorist financing? So the answer to the other question about the analogy, we wouldn't have missed it. We didn't even think about financing for the coal. And it was by happenstance that it happened with 9/11, and we did it, and we were able to go forward. It could have been, we should have been able to bring that. And one of the things that, and the irony point being that we were going to have a meeting the week after 9/11 to determine how counterterrorism could integrate financial investigations into their program. One of the things I was most proud of after 9/11 is the fact that when we established TFOS, every counterterrorism investigation had to have a financial investigation or a financial subfile component to it, where they would have to check FinCEN, they would have to check SARS, CTRs, and everything. And that was really important. That was a step forward. And I think those are important points. And again, we kind of fall back, but let me stop there, Phil, and come back to you.
So I'll take the pre and post from a financial institution perspective. And Dennis, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying about the coal. So think about from an AML investigations perspective and how the financial institutions work. So the financial institutions have monstrous transaction monitoring systems that they run, you know, throughout the day, as everyone knows. And those alerts are kicked out, and those alerts are then worked and turned into a case, and then later turned into a SAR. That's all we did prior to 9/11. And if we did that with the information that we got from you guys post 9/11, we wouldn't have been able to give you much of anything. Because at that point in time, you're talking about account anomalies. These weren't anomalies that were out there. These were different things that we were looking for. These were things like, did a person travel from here to there? Did a person transfer money from here to there? So on and so forth. So that's the pre-environment. So the post-environment was then taking that data, turning it into information and knowledge, and then looking across the rest of your base, your customer base, to see if you can see anything that you can find, not what the transaction monitoring systems can find, but what you can find in the data. And that's something that you know, my team specialized in back at JP Morgan Chase, and then later at US Bank. But as we move forward, just as TFOS has you know, is in the rear view mirror right now, a lot of that data and a lot of that analytic component is also from a banking perspective in the rear view mirror, because most banks went through regulatory pressures, I'll say, after that time. And a lot of banks ended up in the penalty box, you know, with those regulatory pressures. And then when you end up in the penalty box for something like that, you go back to basics. And I think that's what's happening now, is they're going back to basics again.
That's interesting, Phil. Can I just pick up on that, because
Sure.
I can't disagree, right? And I work in a financial institution, and yet at the same time, I mean, I think there are green shoots, around, and it's
Yeah.
in the form of new frameworks for public-private partnership. I mean,
Mhm.
domestically, there's a FinCEN exchange, and the other thing that's happened is, of course, you think about what's 20 years ago compared to today, multiple governments around the world have developed capacity and are doing, active public-private cooperation. So I still bemoan the lack of hardcore investigative capacity on the side of the government, and I wish there were more of it, because I think we would together be more effective. But I think there's recognition of how powerful the framework can be, and there is practical use of it for certain priorities. Like in Europe, they're all over human trafficking, and Australia has good task forces, and we work with them. And the same is true, of course, in the U.S. And FinCEN, I think, is moving that forward. But it's a really interesting question to think about, kind of where we could be.
If you think about what we did right after the event, is we informally wrote the Patriot Act, and because we had law enforcement at the table, we had banks at the table talking to law enforcement, then we had banks talking to banks. So that's 314A and 314B of the Patriot Act right there, and we rewrote it, right at that time.
Yeah, and I would even say the same thing from a slightly different angle. I would say, we kind of wrote it because I was involved in that. We wrote it knowing what was possible and what the FIs were willing to do, right?
Right.
With the kind of intent that it would continue, and then years went by before there were really efforts to institutionalize it.
Right.
And now we're seeing that, but I'd sure like to see it go faster.
Yeah, that's great. But coming back a bit, one of the things that when we go back to what we did after 9/11, and one of the things that validates what we did collectively in the partnerships and in following the financial flows and things, was that when the 9/11 Commission came out with their report card, terrorist financing got an A-, which was the highest grade that was given in anything on that. And a lot of it has to do with what exactly we're talking about. It's the fact that we took financial intelligence and we were able to exploit that intelligence to use that to disrupt terrorists from being able to move or use money. And that's what the key point here is that, what can we do as a community to continue and to grow on that effort? Jody?
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that, because it kind of goes to one of the questions that was asked, and let's not forget some basic things, right? I mean, there were some real wins. I mean, real life and death wins that happened in that period after 9/11, where attacks were discovered and prevented. People were taken off the streets. Missiles were directed, yes. I mean, but also, and there became a culture of collecting. I mean, for example, when the military would do raids, they'd collect the laptop and bring it back looking for the financial intel. And Dennis mentioned that that hadn't happened before. So there were so many changes, but a lot of very real world benefits. And I think also we've seen, and we all see in the FIs, we see a lot of sanctions activity. Sanctions have gotten a lot more targeted, right, and a lot smarter because of this financial intelligence.
Well, I think that's one of the things that Jody, you did so well, was balancing the sanctions, the law enforcement, the intelligence community on things.
Dennis, is this a good time to ask a couple more questions?
Yeah, I was just starting to look at that. If I look, no, please, Kath.
So first of all, Ted Greenberg, who's one of our faculty for this weekend, just added the comment that not only did the financial institutions and government cooperate in a new way after 9/11, but that also led to, among other things, jump teams to bring foreign governments into the objectives of the U.S. government. So it was had a secondary, I guess, benefit. And then the other two questions that we've got really relate to the challenges and opportunities posed by the various sort of fintech things that are happening in our society at such a high speed. So the first question had to do with, how has it changed? How has increased anonymity that goes with some digital transactions changed the CFT landscape in law enforcement? But then the other one, the next question asks, whether that's made it easier to trace, whether, digital transactions have made it easier to trace potential terrorists.
Jody, do you have anything on that? From where you sit, I have a couple of comments.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment. I can't claim to be an expert in crypto. I will, I do my best to follow it because obviously, it's important dynamic. Unfortunately, we're seeing, so far with crypto, we are seeing it used for a lot of illicit purposes. That's kind of been its history so far. It's otherwise being used as an investment vehicle, and it's a highly volatile one. Everyone on this call knows that. There have been though some successes from law enforcement in investigating important criminal activity using crypto. So I can't really judge how, whether it's a net win or net loss for law enforcement. Dennis may have better views on that.
Yeah, I think that's a work in progress, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to be learned there, Phil.
Yeah, there are challenges, obviously, but as you indicate, Dennis, it is a work in progress. It's still early on, but I will still say in certain areas, like, for example, I did a lot of work in the human trafficking space. Cash is still it. Cash is still it. And we're seeing a lot of crypto move into that space, or virtual currency move into that space, but cash is still it.
Yeah, that's it's funny how we get into the crypto space and how that's true across the board. So it's not just a terrorism threat, but it's definitely very interesting. But coming back to our theme, one of the things that we did that I think we can still do, and regardless of whatever, if we're dealing with crypto or anything, is the ability to become more proactive and to use financial intelligence to kind of weaponize it, in a sense, to make it a proactive tool. And I'm very passionate about this particular topic, whether it's terrorist financing, whether it's financial investigations, because I've seen it firsthand, how we can get out in front. The more proactive we can be, the more disruptive we are, the more we can prevent different things from happening. And and I know, Jody, you still work on that with what you do at Western Union, plus your experience at the National Security Council.
Well, there's a lot of, I think it has come out already. I don't want to be too repetitive, but the technology's gotten a lot better. And I think government is trying to get the incentives right for financial institutions. As we've seen with some of the recent developments on public-private, we're trying to. We all of us in business have incentives to be efficient as well. So we're trying to use technology as much as we can. To machine learning to identify patterns, information we're getting from law enforcement to change our models, ongoing relationships with law enforcement to know what they're looking for. And so those are all to me, those are kind of table stakes for an effective compliance program. We're just we just kind of want to keep working. We see lots of opportunities, put it that way, because at least everyone's still got different perspectives, and one of ours is we've got a limited kind of transactions, but we see it all over the world, and we see opportunities for governments to work together and for pieces of investigations to be pulled together to see larger wholes.
Phil, let me ask him, because we're coming down on time, and you more than anybody has been proactive, and you mentioned what you've done with human trafficking and things, and especially around the Super Bowls. That type of initiative is something we can apply, and we have applied with terrorism. I look at you as being one of the masters in this area in terms of, you know, how do you apply, regardless of the potential consequences with regulators and everything, from the standpoint of prevention and certainly disruption.
So the most important thing, and when I talk about this, it's all about data, and it's all about understanding your data, knowing how to get to that data, and knowing what to do with it once you get it. What we did around human trafficking and the Super Bowl, and you heard me mention this back when we were talking about 9/11. One of the first things that we did is we went to our technology team and we pulled the data person into our group. And from that point forward, I had a small data team as a part of my investigative team, because we knew number one, that we were going to find your structuring, your wires to high-risk jurisdictions. That's the type of stuff that's coming out of a transaction monitoring system. But we're not going to find human trafficking. We're not going to find human terrorist financing or anything like that coming out of a transaction monitoring system. We have to go get it. And that's where the partnership really is important, because at 9/11 and beyond, in the communication channel that you have with law enforcement, one of the things that I always talked about with Dennis is, I said, Dennis, I'm really not interested in who, I'm interested in how. If you can tell me how they're doing things, I might be able to tell you who it is that's doing those things. And that's what we were able to do through through our data analytics, and we took that into the human trafficking space and through the Super Bowls and whatnot, and we're very successful with that.
You know, Phil, that's a great point, because I do a lot of SAR training, and I talk about that, and I talk about, if I'm from law enforcement, the why is most important to me. Why do you think that's suspicious? But I always say that for the financial institution, it's the how, and you just hammered that home. So,
Yeah, if we can actually discern from that how where that electronic choke point is internally, then we can go get it.
Yeah, it's a great point, Phil. I mean, the example that I have that's very similar is from Western Union's perspective, was around the foreign fighter phenomenon of that we saw in the Syrian conflict, and people going back and forth from Western countries, and we were able, it was the same kind of thing. We had to have specific information from law enforcement about what kind of patterns they were looking for, and then we could find them, and it was mutually beneficial, because we were also able to identify macro trends and particular staging locations in Turkey, for example, that people were using to go back and forth.
I'll throw a plug out to Western Union. Western Union has a very good proactive team who does this and are really top of game right now.
So John, I know you need to come in and finish things, but let me just make one comment. I think law enforcement and the intelligence community, they keep falling back on chasing the bullets and the bombs. And the reality is, at the end of the day, what we need to chase is the dollars. We got to follow the money. So I'm going to stop right there. John, go ahead.
Yeah, following the money is very important, and I like the big data, and there's a lot of good discussion here. And I would be glad to go on all night long on this. This is really a good discussion. But we do need to kind of call it a break here, at least for this session. So what I want to do is just thank you, Dennis, Jody, Phil, for a great discussion this evening. It was wonderful. Gives us a lot to think about, reminds us not to be complacent with whatever area we're in, law enforcement, government agencies, or in the private sector in the banking. So very good. For those in the ACAMS chapter or ACAMS in general that are tuning in, make sure that you're keeping your profile up to date. I know there's a lot of people that have switched positions or, have differing roles now and things like that. So it really does help to have, everything up to date. And if you're a Northern Ohio chapter member and you've changed your profile at ACAMS, be sure to email us, let us know so we can update our mailing list with any new email that you might have. Looking forward, we're going to have the next chapter Mafia event on January 6th. That's not that far away here. It's going to be with Paul Jabby from Coinbase. And I heard him at the FBI in Cleveland in 2019. He did a wonderful presentation talking about cryptocurrency, the coin wallets, the AML program that they do, the CDD, and the cooperation with law enforcement. So I'm looking forward to that being a really great way to start out the year, is to get some better information on cryptocurrency and the wallet pieces. We'll communicate those events as they come up, and I want to remind everybody that there's the link in the chat. Please make sure you click on that before you leave the Zoom. That way you can go in and get your CE credits and make sure everything's correct. And then also want to thank the MAFI program and everyone that's attended this evening. Great discussion, great audience, I think. And it's probably not something you want to go thinking into the holidays about, but at the same time, it's something we have to keep in mind. So I'll turn it over to Kathy if you had anything, and if not.
No, I'll just put up the slide for continuing education. I want to echo John's thanks to our panelists. I could sit here all night and listen to the three of you talk, and I'm so lucky that I get to sit in on the classes this weekend. So I'm really looking forward to that. So I'm going to share my screen. I'll leave it up for a few minutes before I end the webinar. For those of you that need the information, again, a reminder that this has not yet been approved for CLE, but we have submitted it, but it may not come through for this year. So with that, I'll wish everyone happy holidays, and we'll see you again for our next webinar on January 6th. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.